A friend of mine from Beijing recently sent me some photos and videos of a 1965 classic car that he's been looking at. At first glance, I could tell that the car was in really good shape. No visible dents or scratches. The steering wheel and dashboard were in excellent condition, and the interior was still well preserved, especially the wooden panels. The back seat was just as good, and all the wheel covers were intact. Overall, it looked like this car had been well taken care of. After seeing the photos and videos, I decided to take a trip to check out the car in person. There's always something reassuring about seeing a car up close, especially a vintage one. I knew I would feel more confident if I could check the car out myself. If everything checked out, I was ready to make the purchase that day. Of course, I would take some photos to compare, because no matter how good the photos or videos are, there's always a difference when you see the car in real life. When I arrived, I noticed that the paint on the rear fender had completely peeled off, which was a bit of a disappointment. But besides that, everything else seemed solid. The car started right up, and the engine ran smoothly without any strange noises. The body of the car was in great condition, and the mechanical parts seemed to be functioning properly. It looked like it had been well maintained over the years. There was just one small issue with the trunk. It wouldn't open at first. The car uses a key to unlock the trunk, but when I tried, it didn't work. After a bit of tinkering, I figured it out and managed to open it. To my surprise, I found something unexpected inside: an old can of engine oil. It was probably decades old by now, and it looked like it had been sitting there for a long time. It was like finding a hidden treasure in a classic car, and I couldn't help but laugh at the discovery. The oil had clearly changed color over the years, but it was a fun little piece of automotive history. Despite the high price, I decided to go ahead and buy the car. It's a classic after all, and I've always wanted to own a vintage model. I'm sure some people would think it was too expensive, but there's just something about this car that I couldn't resist. After finalizing the deal, I had the car loaded up and headed home. I knew I'd probably get some teasing when I got back, but honestly, it was totally worth it. When the car finally arrived at my place, I was ecstatic. It's a 1965 classic car that still runs like a dream. The first thing I wanted to do was clean the engine and check everything over. The previous owner assured me that the engine wouldn't need much work, so I planned to start by disassembling a few parts, replacing any worn-out pieces, and adding fresh oil. The goal was to make sure everything was properly lubricated and functioning smoothly. As I was going through the car, I found something else amusing: another set of keys tucked away in the car. Some of the keys were for ignition, while others were for the doors and the trunk. I couldn't resist trying them out. After a bit of trial and error, I managed to get the trunk open again. And inside, I found even more surprises: more old parts and an extra can of vintage oil. It felt like I was uncovering a time capsule inside the car. I'm sure these little discoveries will be fun to look back on as I continue working on the restoration. Now that I have the car home, the real work begins. I'm excited to start the restoration process, but it won't be a quick fix. I plan to carefully go over every detail, replacing any worn or broken parts, and making sure the engine is running smoothly. This car is a piece of history, and I want to preserve it as best as I can. There's something special about owning a classic car, especially one that's been well preserved over the years. I'm looking forward to the journey ahead and can't wait to see this car back in top shape. Restoring classic cars has always been a passion of mine, and this 1965 model will be a rewarding project. I know it will take time and effort, but the joy of bringing a vintage car back to life is worth every bit of work. This is just the beginning of what I'm sure will be an exciting adventure with this timeless beauty. I came across something interesting while working on this car: a full tank of fuel. However, what really caught my attention wasn't the fuel, but rather the spare tire sitting next to it. It's not the original 820-15 tire that would have come with the car, but instead it's a 750-25, which is a newer replacement. The cool thing is, it's never been used before, so it's in excellent condition. It's always a bonus to find a spare tire in such good shape, especially when it hasn't been on the road. After that, I moved on to installing the battery. The battery still had its original protective coating, which is a pleasant surprise. It's definitely one of the most practical things about this old car. There's a lot of satisfaction in seeing things like this in good condition. It gives you hope for the rest of the restoration process. With the battery installed, I decided to check the oil system. We don't want any dirty oil spilling out, so I made sure to disconnect the oil lines carefully. As soon as everything was in place, I turned the key to see if the engine would fire up. The indicator lights on the dashboard lit up, and that was a positive sign. It means that at least some of the essential systems are functioning. I gave the engine a try, and it turned over without any issues. This was a great sign, but the real test was whether the engine would actually fire up. You never know how long a car has been sitting, and when it sits for a while, components like the spark plugs can get oxidized, which could prevent the engine from starting. I pulled the distributor cap off and checked for spark, just to make sure everything was in working order. Sure enough, there was spark, which is a great sign that the ignition system is working. It's a relief because when you're dealing with old cars like this, the electrical components are often the first to fail. So getting the spark to fire right up means we're on the right track. With the ignition system looking good, I decided to check the rest of the car's electrical system. I wasn't expecting major issues, but I always like to be thorough. The spark plugs seemed fine, but when I inspected the distributor cap more closely, I noticed some wear. There was a little bit of discoloration, which could be due to overheating over time. It wasn't a huge problem, but it definitely needed attention. The next thing I noticed was a significant crack in the distributor cap itself. This could cause problems with the ignition, so that's definitely something that will need to be replaced. A cracked distributor cap can lead to misfires and could prevent the engine from running smoothly. So that's going on the list of parts to replace. When I first picked up the car, the previous owner had warned me that the brakes were not working properly. It's always a red flag when a previous owner mentions brake issues, so I knew that this would be a priority. The car had been sitting for a while, and when you leave a car unused for a long time, systems like the brakes can deteriorate quickly. The owner also mentioned that the brakes were so bad that they nearly caused an accident, which made me even more concerned. Safety always comes first, and I knew that the brake system needed to be completely overhauled. I started by checking the brake components and discovered that all the rubber seals had deteriorated. These seals are essential for proper braking, so I immediately started to dismantle the brake system. As I started removing the brake parts, it became clear that the seals had completely dried out. This kind of wear is typical for cars that have been sitting for a while, and it's always a sign that some parts need to be replaced. While the rest of the car seemed to be in decent condition, the brake system was in bad shape and needed serious attention. Honestly, I was a little worried about the car. If the brakes weren't fixed, it could lead to a serious safety issue down the road. A car with faulty brakes is a ticking time bomb, and I didn't want to take any chances. So I replaced the old brake seals and swapped out the worn-out components with new, more reliable ones. This included installing new brake pads that should provide better performance and safety. With the old seals and parts replaced, the brake system is now fully functional and safe. I also checked the brake calipers, and sure enough, they needed to be removed and serviced. I took them apart and was able to confirm that the brake pads had worn down significantly. It's a good thing I caught it when I did, because if I hadn't, there could have been major issues when driving. After all the brake work was done, I felt much more confident about the safety of the car. The car is now running smoother, and most importantly, the brakes are in top shape, so it's ready to hit the road again. I've been working on cleaning up and reconditioning all the car parts that I had stashed away for a while. Some of these pieces I bought a while back, but honestly, I had totally forgotten where I put them. It's always the case with old car parts. You don't use them every day, so you forget about them. But when you need them the most, it's like finding hidden treasure. I was just able to dig through my stash and found another box of parts I had bought earlier. It's amazing how some things that seemed useless at the time are now the exact parts I need. It's like the universe knew this moment would come. Honestly, this is what makes working on old cars so rewarding. Even the things you think won't be helpful can surprise you when the time comes. Now the real work begins, getting everything back to working condition. I'm going to repair and replace parts to bring everything up to standard. Once done, this car will be running just like new again. There are still a few more tasks left, but we're getting closer to the finish line. My new parts finally showed up today, all packed safely and ready to go. This is what I've been waiting for. Now I can get started on installing the ignition coil and cap. This is one of those projects I've been dreaming about for days, and now it's all coming together. Let's get everything installed and get this car up and running. Once I get the ignition system in place, I'll be able to start the engine up. It's time to accelerate the process, put everything together, and make sure it all works smoothly. I can't wait to see the results. Okay, time to get the ignition coil and cap installed. I've been waiting for this moment for a while, and it's finally here. Let's see if this will get the car to start. Fingers crossed. And just like that, it started. The engine is running, and it's running great. Honestly, there's nothing more satisfying than hearing an old engine come to life after all the work you've put into it. This is why I love working on these cars. Even when they give you all kinds of problems, there's always that moment when everything clicks and you know it was all worth it. But wait, there's still one issue. It looks like the fuel isn't being pumped properly, which means the fuel pump isn't working as it should. So I'm going to have to replace that as well. This means I'll need to wait for some new parts to arrive, and it might take a couple of days, but no worries, we'll keep moving forward. While waiting for the new parts, I'm using my secret tricks to keep things moving. I know you all are probably eager to see the progress, so I'm doing everything I can to speed things up. I get messages every day from people asking if I'm going to replace the ignition valve or if I'm just going to spray some oil and call it a day. Well, no, every car deserves the proper care, and that includes replacing worn parts and making sure everything's working properly before it hits the road again. If I showed every step of the process, it would take forever, and honestly, I'm sure no one wants to watch that. So I'm skipping ahead a little to get that fuel pump installed and make sure everything is running smoothly. Finally, after a bit of work, everything is in place and the car is running just as it should. The fuel pump is working and I've hooked up the fuel line. We're almost there. The car's looking great now. One more thing. The generator belt was totally worn out too. It had completely fallen apart, so I had to remove the old one and replace it with a new belt. You don't always expect these small issues, but it's part of the deal when you're working on a car that's been around for a while. You can't just fix the big things. It's the little parts that matter just as much. Now, with the new belt in place and everything else running smoothly, this car is ready for the road. There's nothing quite like the satisfaction of working on an old car, getting it back to life, and knowing that it's going to run like a champ. It's been a long road, but I'm almost done. Time to finish up, give it a final check, and take this beauty for a spin. This might just be the least expensive repair I've done in a while. Only $36 for all this. The car originally came with just 3 belts, so I went ahead and bought a 4th one as a backup. For $36, I got 4 belts, and I'm happy to keep the extra in case something goes wrong. I've got everything installed now, and it's looking solid. Let's take it for a test run and see how it does. Next, I'll get the air filter put in properly, and once that's done, we're good to go. I've got the engine belt sorted out, and while I'm at it, I'm also going to take care of that thick coconut board that needs to go back in place. Everything's being restored to its original condition, just like when I first got the car. The paint had started peeling off, so I'm going to reapply it. This process can be pretty slow, but I'm going to start by spraying on a new base coat, followed by sanding it down with a metal brush. Then I'll reapply the base coat and top it off with a new coat of primer and a fresh paint layer. The result's going to be great, looking brand new again. While the paint is drying, I'm not just sitting around. I've also removed the old horn, which was beyond repair, and replaced it with an original factory part. This new horn actually has 3 different sound levels, high, medium, and low, and I have to say it sounds fantastic. Once the horn is taken care of, I'll move on to the car's entire electrical system, including the lights and other components. I'm replacing any faulty parts and making sure everything is working as it should. Now that the new horn is in place, the sound is crisp and clear, and I'm happy with the result. The lights are all fixed up too. The headlights, tail lights, and indicators are working perfectly. The rear lights have this cool red glow that really pops. Everything in the electrical system is running smoothly, and I'm happy to see it all come together. Moving on, the engine oil needs to be changed. Given that this car is pretty old, I'm sure there's a lot of carbon buildup in the engine. To take care of that, I'll add a fuel injector cleaner to the tank, something I always do with older cars like this. After adding the cleaner, I'll top off the tank with fresh gasoline. It's a simple step that can really help improve engine performance over time. With everything taken care of, it's time to fire it up and see how it runs. The engine starts up smoothly with no issues, and the car is running just as it should. The restoration is coming together beautifully. People always say that old cars like this are like treasures, and now I see why. It's got such a unique design. The sound of the horn, the lights, the dashboard, it all adds up to something special. I'll give it one last check to make sure everything's running smoothly. Check the oil pressure and make sure there's no weird engine noise. It's been a few days of hard work, but now the car's running well again. Let's take it for a spin and see how it handles on the road. Now that it's running, it's time to give it a proper wash. This car has been sitting for so long, and I think it's ready to be pampered a bit. It hasn't had a proper wash in ages, so I'm sure it's excited to get all that dirt and grime cleaned off. Once I'm done, it'll look like a totally new car, like taking a middle-aged man and turning him into a fresh-faced, good-looking guy again. The interior looks great, and the exterior is shining. I'm really happy with how everything turned out. All the money and time spent restoring this old car was definitely worth it. Take a look at how fantastic it looks now. It's like a completely different vehicle.